What is the scariest story you know that is 100% true? I would call it creepy more than scary, but my mom's friend had a small house and lived alone. She noticed weird things, a batch of soup depleting faster than usual, missing eggs, damp towels in the hamper when she hadn't used any, extra dishes in the dishwasher, etc. This went on for months. She thought she was just being forgetful. One day she heard some thumping around in her attic and went to investigate. She found some makeshift living quarters, small radio, hot plate, sleeping bag, pillow, food wrappers, etc. She called the cops who came to keep an eye on the place. They ended up catching a homeless man climbing a tree, trying to sneak into her attic window. He had been doing this almost daily. He would wait for her to go to work, then go downstairs and help himself to food and amenities. The funny part about this story is they got to know each other throughout the ordeal, and the guy was actually very respectful, just down on his luck. She didn't press charges, instead, let him move in, helped him get a job, and he lived in the attic until he got back on his feet. Creepy shit with a happy ending. My mom was driving, and a guy ran out in the road, so she stopped so she couldn't hit him. It was nighttime, so it was pretty dark out, and 3 other men emerged from the forest around, all trying to use the door handles of her car to get in. She locked them luckily, and gassed it to the nearest town. Remember to always lock your car after you start it, because if it wasn't unlocked, who knows what would have happened to her. Probably one of the many reasons newer cars auto-lock their doors once you go over 15 miles per hour. My friend's boss bought an Audi A4 convertible, back when they were new and interesting. One of the talking points was the pop-up roll hoops that were hidden unless you rolled it. A few months after buying it, he got to test those roll hoops out, as he lost control and skidded down a steep bank about 10 meters, 35 feet, deep. The roll hoops did their job, and he survived with just cuts and scratches from the bushes he'd plowed through. The car ended up the right way up and he got out, walked back up the bank to the side of the road, then got on the phone to the police to report the accident. While he was standing there, a driver from a car that had seen the accident came over to speak to him. Approaching from behind, the other driver asked if he was okay. My friend's boss turned around to reply and dropped dead. His neck had been fractured, but was in one piece right up until he turned his head, when it severed his spinal cord. That would be so fucking traumatic for the other driver. Various torture murders are probably the most horrific things I've read about. Junko Furuta, who was a perfectly normal girl until she was kidnapped off the street by a gang for no reason, purely wrong place, wrong time, according to Japanese sources, and unimaginably raped and tortured to death over 44 days. Kiki Camarena, a DEA agent in Mexico who was kidnapped by the Guadalajara cartel and tortured to death over about 3 days. His story is the central focus of the show Narcos, Mexico, but from what I've read, his death was even more brutal than what they make it out to be. A detail consistent in both is that they brought in a doctor to revive him numerous times when he got too close to death, and keep him conscious so he couldn't pass out from the pain. Kellyanne Bates, who was groomed from a young age by a scumbag who eventually killed her slowly over the course of about a month in their apartment. Her injuries were so horrific the jury at the guy's trial had to get counseling. For example, her eyes were missing and there were stab wounds in the sockets. Sylvia Likens, whose parents left her in the care of a woman who both personally and with the help of her children and their friends degraded, tortured, and killed over several months. The Hello Kitty murder in China, where a man and his about 13-year-old girlfriend kidnapped a prostitute who had supposedly stolen from him, even though sources say she had paid him back with interest, tortured her to death, and then stuffed her corpse into a Hello Kitty toy. Baby Brianna, a newborn whose mother, father, and uncle tortured and raped her from the second they brought her home from the hospital until the second she died. Baby P, a British toddler whose mother let her boyfriend torture him to death. His back was broken in his last days of life. Honestly, there are just so many horrifically on par with each other, you could list them all day. Artemis Pyle, the drummer from Lynyrd Skynyrd, survived a plane crash and walked to a nearby house only to be shot by the homeowner. The homeowner saw a bloody long-haired man and winged him. Pyle survived that as well and made a full recovery. A female friend in college disappeared from a party at another university in the city town 25-ish miles north of our school. She had arrived with another friend who I believe had driven. At some point she split off to play cornhole or something and was later inexplicably gone. Phone calls went to voicemail, police were called, but she was simply missing. About 10 days later she was found by a homeless man who witnessed her crawling up to a bus stop in the city, begging for help. She had broken a leg and an arm, and was in very bad shape. At the quite large party, She had her drink secretly drugged and was then led off by a group of men into their vehicle. She was taken to an apartment where she was drugged, repeatedly raped, and locked in a small room in between with a bucket to use as a bathroom. At one point, after being injected with heroin and raped, she somehow managed to convince one of her captors to allow her to use the actual bathroom to clean herself up. This bathroom had a small window to the outside, and with the shower running, she managed to squeeze out and fell from the third story into a large hedge/bush. From there she crawled from the apartment complex to the road and bus stop, where the homeless man saw her and called police. Many cars stopped upon seeing her, making her captives unable to recapture her. 3 men were later arrested for the crime after surveillance cameras allowed police to locate the apartment which she jumped from. She returned to our university almost 2 years later, graduated, and became a nurse. She was obviously traumatized, never partied again, carried a gun everywhere she could, and somehow moved on with life. It was a terrifying tale none of us ever forgot. She was an 18-year-old freshman when the incident happened. I work at a max security prison and we have several inmates who are severely mentally ill. The ones that self-harm wear a Fitbit kind of thing to monitor heart rate. If there is a change, we rush their room to stop whatever is happening. On top of this, we also do visual inspections. On one round, a coworker was doing cell checks and noticed this particular inmate had blood on their face, but nothing came up on the monitors or anything. So he called to the inmates to ask if they were okay. The inmate had their eyes closed and just kept repeating, "It doesn't hurt." The inmate would not answer where the blood was from. We opened the cell to see what the situation was, and it turns out the inmate had plucked out both of their eyes and they were laying on the floor. The inmate's HR monitor never alerted and the inmate never screamed. Paramedics said the inmate's vitals were normal and the inmate was fully responsive. Holy fuck, so he was calm throughout that shit? Yep, no elevated heart rate, no sign that the inmate was in any discomfort at all. Enjoying the content? Don't forget to like and subscribe. We put out new videos every day. While you're smashing that like button, here's a meme to entertain you. When my aunt was about 16, she was working at a grocery store and had a boss in his mid-20s. One day he called the house and was begging her to sneak out and hang out with him. She was considering it because it was her boss and she didn't want to say no. My mom, who is 2 years younger than her, always gets these incredibly spot-on gut feelings. She had one that night and begged my aunt not to go out with him. Thankfully she listened to my mom and told him no, which made him really angry. He ended up going out that night and meeting another girl. He took her out to some cliffs and raped her and pushed her off. Somehow she lived through this and was able to get him sent to prison. I feel so sorry for that girl and so thankful for my mom and her gut feelings. Always trust your gut. Not as scary as some of the stories here, but I was pretty horrified when my dad told me the story. There are some really big houses in the woods in my hometown. One of the owners went out drinking with his buddies and realized he forgot the key to the gate when he got home. So he decided to just climb the gate. While climbing in his drunken state, he slips and his leg gets pierced by one of the spikes on the gate. He was hanging there but too afraid to call for his wife, since he was sure she would just open the automatic gate from inside the house, and since it was one of those gates that slides to the side, it would just rip his leg off if she did. He was hanging there the entire night until his wife woke up, saw him and called the fire department. My dad, who is one of the firefighters that showed up, said they had to saw off the spike to get him off. Just imagine hanging from your own gate all night not being able to call for help. I spent my first 10 years in New Delhi. Back then, we would find dead women, burnt with acid or set on fire, and it used to be so normal. Like, oh look, another one of those dowry cases where her family didn't pay the husband enough money so they killed her. Many years later I revisited those memories and realized how insane that actually was. I'd totally forgotten about all that. People who use acid as a weapon are seriously fucked. People who kill women over dowries are seriously fucked. The driver one of the semis we took in on trade died in the truck. The sleeping area is a bunk with a mattress that can be flipped up, and under it is a seat and a table. So during the day it's a dinette setup, and at night, you pull a lever and pull the bunk down to sleep. Well, something happened and the bunk flipped up while the driver was sleeping and it pinned him against the wall. He couldn't get it to drop back down and suffocated. He was stuck there for somewhere around 12 hours. Someone had noticed that he was parked for an unusually long amount of time for the kind of deliveries he did. The company that built the sleeper did something to the bunk so that couldn't happen again and supposedly recalled all of that sleeper style. I worked for U-Haul when I was 18 and it was located in front of a club that was known for being really sketchy. I came in to open one morning and it was common for people to knock on the door hoping to get in early and get their truck. On this day, I hear frantic knocking on the door. I'm there alone still, so it kind of startled me. I look and there's a woman, completely naked, covered in what looks like blood. I called the cops and grabbed one of the moving blankets and went outside to cover her up. She smelled really bad and was a mess. Ended up being blood and her own shit she was covered in. Found out later she was drugged at the club that night/early morning, raped and left blacked out in the alley. It was just a fucked up and surreal situation to be involved in. I was in a crappy motel. The room had bedbugs. I was too exhausted to go to the front desk. I just needed to make it until the morning. I slept in the tub. Hours later I hear someone breaking through the window. I had a big knife with me and ran out into the room to find a man halfway through my window. We stared for a while at each other in shock. I think we both were scared. Then he says, "Is this your room?" I'm like, "Yes, this is my room, man." More staring. Then he slowly starts backing out while cursing me for leaving my window unlocked and not expecting him to break in. Motel on Watt Ave, Sacramento. Old janitor from high school, friendly Ecuadorian man who went by Ping. Worked at the school for 20 plus years and nobody had a problem with him. I guess his wife was leaving him and in the process of moving out. He caught her in bed with her new man. Next day, in the middle of town, he opened fire on her, the man, and then killed himself before any cops had time to respond. My friend tripped and fell onto the tracks, landing his face onto the third rail. We kinda stood there in absolute shock because we thought he was dead. But then he said, "Can I move? Will I be electrocuted?" We told him to move instantly and he did. We got him off the tracks, and no less than 2 minutes later a train went zipping by. I think the third rail turned on seconds after his face came off of it. I know that's not scary to a lot of people, but to me it was because I would have lost a close friend back when I was about 12. That there's a guy casing the bar that I work at literally right now, and I can't do anything to stop him. He's been in asking what time/days we're open, and what days we have security. Caught him feeling the corners of our windows and doors too. Unfortunately, until he breaks in and robs us, the police won't do a thing. I hope you took a picture of him. Yeah, we have a crystal clear close-up of his face. We took it and told him we know he's watching us. He won't last 2 seconds if we did rob us or any venue around us. But we're a small bar with single members of staff on at a time, so it's worrying. A guy I worked with was riding his dirt bike through the woods and somebody hung a cable between 2 trees. My buddy cut his throat on it and saw the dude steal his dirt bike. Woke up in the hospital with a lacerated throat and a broken larynx. Pretty crazy what somebody will do for something so cheap. Dude is lucky he didn't get decapitated. The story of Mary Vincent always stands out to me. In 1978, 15-year-old Mary was hitchhiking. A man named Lawrence Singleton picked her up. He brutally raped her, and eventually made her get out of the car. She planned to run, but he noticed, and cut both her arms off. He threw her into a ditch/ravine and left her to die. She packed her stumps with mud to stop the bleeding and spent all night crawling out. She eventually makes it to the highway and starts walking, naked and covered in blood. The first car that saw her sped away in fear. The second car was a couple on their honeymoon. They picked her up and she survived. Edited to add, I was in a rush when I wrote this, so you should definitely read more into the story. It's crazy. From the horrific act itself, to the court proceedings, to the fact that he hardly served any time. Nutty Putty Cave in Utah was sealed up in 2009 after John Jones was trapped upside down in a small crevice while spelunking. When rescue teams finally arrived, he had been upside down for so long that his legs were drained of blood. The only possible way to have gotten him out was to break his legs, which would have sent him into fatal shock. He died after being trapped for 28 hours. His body's still in the cave. Didn't they almost get him out? But then one of the pulleys snapped and he got trapped even worse? That's my personal nightmare. Yes, this story's why I'm never going spelunking.